edition for the Land of Israel Network. It is Tuesday morning, September 8th, 2020, the 19th day of Elul, 5780, moving very rapidly into the period called the High Holidays in the Jewish world. And I am very honored to have with me today Dr. Yiftach Shalev from the Israel Antiquities Authority, because as some of you know, I've been doing some digging, right? Tour guides aren't exactly very busy these days. And so some of us have been volunteering at some of the amazing archaeological sites around the country. And I was really privileged, although it was quite hot. I decided that maybe I shouldn't dig on a day where if that was my temperature, they wouldn't let me into the mall. But anyhow, maybe that's like, should be a rule. Anyhow, I spent a couple of days in what's called the Givati parking lot, part of the greater complex of Ir David, of the city of David, south of the old city of Jerusalem. And it's hard to put it into words how moving it was. And Dr. Shalev, this is one of his areas that he's working on. And so I asked him if he would join me today to illuminate for many of you listening some of the really, not just extraordinary finds that we're having in Jerusalem, but how they even have global implications. So Dr. Yiftach, thank you. Dr. Shalev, thank you so much for joining me today on Rejuvenation.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so what is going on, particularly the dig where I was digging, they were saying was First Temple period and just after the rebuilding of Jerusalem in what's known as the Persian period, the early Persian period, not the afterwards. So what's going on in this dig that is so, well, literally groundbreaking when it comes to archaeology? Very bad joke, I apologize.
First, let me start with saying that the Givati parking lot is situated on the western slope of the ridge of the city of David, meaning that basically what we're digging there is the borders of Jerusalem, right outside of the ancient core of the town. What we exposed there, at the very bottom of the slope, we exposed a very large structure, actually one of the biggest of its kind found so far in Jerusalem, dated to the very late Iron Age, meaning just before the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC. It's a very large structure built of Asher stones that were cut into squares in order to fit the construction. And that house was burned in huge fire. And according to the finds on the floor, vessels that we found in situ, where they were left before the destruction, we can date this destruction to the beginning of the 6th century, and most likely to the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC. So the house was ruined down in huge fire. And we do have other places in Jerusalem with example for this destruction. So we know that the city was burned down as it is described at the book, at the text. But what was fascinating to us regarding your question about the Persian period is that this was the first time that we actually found Persian period remains in Jerusalem. Now, let me emphasize that. In 150 years of excavation in Jerusalem, we do have lots of finds dated to the Persian period, meaning vessels, coins, stamp handle, small finds. But there's not even one structure that we can date to this period. So we don't really know how the city looked like. We got no idea what was the layout of the town, how was it built, what happened there. We just know that people lived there. And what we found in this structure that we excavated is that we realized that people came back to the same structure later on, most probably 50, 70 years after its destruction, and settled down into the ruins, inside the destructed house. Part of it was so destructed, we had piles of 2.5 meters of debris in some of the rooms. So, yeah, it took us about a year just to move this debris and to clear the structure. So some of the rooms were basically too full and no one can use them. But the northern part of the structure, most probably the yard, was still vacant, and during the 5th century, most probably during the early 5th century, right after the return from Babylon, we believe, people came and cleared the area and settled down inside the ruined house. So now at least we got some kind of an interesting picture of a city mostly destroyed, destructed houses everywhere, ruins everywhere, but people are coming back into these places, and it's still important to them, or important enough to them, that they want to move to another place and start building a new houses. The first settling down in the same places inside the ruins, and only, I don't know, several years later, probably after economy rose again and the administration rose again and people could afford to start rebuilding new town, they moved from these ruins into other places that start building a new house. So this is a completely new picture of Jerusalem that we never had before.
Wow. So just to put some historical, just to get it straight historically, minus 586, the Babylonians are the ones who destroyed Jerusalem, burned the first temple, as far as we know. And then they don't do anything in Jerusalem, right? There's no, they destroy it and they leave. We don't have any Babylonian remains other than the remains of the destruction. Right? Most of the Jews are, well, at least the leadership goes into the Babylon. Later on, other people leave, especially after Gedaliah is killed. They go to Egypt, they go up to Babylon. So there are some people still in the land, but definitely what you're saying is Jerusalem is pretty much left alone. So some of the texts that we have in what's really a very dark period of history where there's little known, come from the biblical text. I'm mentioning this because many of my listeners are familiar. The books of Nehemiah, the books of Ezra, I would say maybe even the book of Esther, is that whole time period where Persia has now taken over Babylon, including their rule over this area, Yahud, or whatever they're calling it. Right. So this is huge what's happening here, to find that people have come to resettle Jerusalem. One of the archaeologists, you weren't there the day I was there, was speaking, he quoted something about the book of Nehemiah, where they talk about rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem and coming back. But this is many years later, right? This is like in the middle of the 5th century, more or less?
Yeah. According to the book of Nehemiah is dated to the mid-5th century BC, or at least the event should be dated to the mid-5th century BC. We don't really know. There is a big debate about when exactly the book was written and if it is actually written in the Persian period. But what's important for us is, I think, is not the exact dating, is that the book echoes the real events of Jerusalem. So even if the exact story of this night trip around the walls of Jerusalem, as is described in the book, when Nehemiah sees the city in its ruin, even if the exact event never happened, the idea of people living inside a ruined town, this was probably the reality. So this is why the excavation at Givati is so important for us. We can actually see how it happened. We can see people settling down in distracted houses. So I'm not saying that the text is 100% accurate, but it echoes the reality that was at that time.
That now you're finding. It was, I have to say that it was incredibly moving, especially this time of year, to be there. I was digging between two doorposts. It was clearly the entry into a building, but you could see that inside the building had been built later because the stones of the walls were not organized, they were not beautifully cut, they were not ashlars. And I uncovered a couple of flagstones on the floor in between the ashlars, which Nitzan, the doctoral candidate who was working there, who was, by the way, lovely and a wonderful teacher. No, because it can go either way. You can feel like you're sitting there and just working very hard, or you can feel that the archaeologists that are there are really so excited about what they're doing that they're teaching us the meaning of what's happening.
It's hard not to be excited when you're excavating. It's such an exciting.
It is. It is. Although many of it is hours of just very carefully brushing and doing all that. But when I found a piece of pottery wedged in between these two flagstones, and I called her over, and there was really this palpable, she said, wow, I didn't think that there was a floor here, if this is the original floor.
Yeah, it was actually, she called me in the afternoon and told me, we found a floor between these ashlars, and I was like, what, are you kidding me?
Oh, so that was me? So,
you know, that was a nice discovery, thank you.
No problem, I will get that there. As I said, it was worth ruining my manicure, but it was actually what you said now. It was feeling that I was inside the Churban. You know, we talk a lot about the destruction of the temple, especially this time of year, and the second temple, but to feel that I was in a place where the destruction had happened, but people had come back and they were living in it. They were surrounded by it every day. It wasn't some theoretical happened a long time ago thing for them.
Right.
It was, and who knew what was going to be? I mean, here we are living in a strong country with lots of Jews and with, you know, whatever, right, whatever's going on here, and with Jerusalem as our capital. They had no idea, and they were still coming back full of faith, full of hope. Could not have been easy in terms of even finding food and water and some kind of administration. And it was just this feeling of, wow, I mean, I'm really just part of this tremendous chain. It was tremendous. Just, I mean, I want to thank you because that you're making it available to lay people, as it were, as well, and not just archaeologists to be able to get in there. So now what came out a few weeks ago, and this is what Nitzan is working on, is how this affects our ideas of the Earth's magnetic field. How does what you find play into that?
Okay. As you know, or probably as Nitzan already explained to you, archaeology today is more than just moving dirt and see what we can find in our hands and or see in our eyes. We use lots and lots of different methods to understand what really happened, trying to do site formation, trying to understand what exactly happened using chemical, physical, and all kind of other methods. And one of them, which I think we were the first to use in this way, is what is called paleomagnetism. Paleomagnetism basically is the reconstruction of the ancient magnetic field of the planet of Earth. This is one of the most intriguing phenomena. We know that the magnetic pole is not stable. It's keep moving, shifting all the time. Scientists don't know exactly why it's happening and how it happens, but they understand that, or at least Einstein said that if we understand why it happens, we'll probably understand Earth much better. So we are scientists trying to understand that. As it goes, there are magnetic minerals all around us in every material. When a stone is consolidated, these minerals are structured according to the northern pole when the consolidation is happening. Try to imagine a volcano erupted, the lava is floating on the earth. When it cools down, all these magnetic minerals are settling down in order according to the northern pole. But if you take this material, let's say this magma in our example, and heat it again, the chemical connection are loosened up. The minerals inside are now, try to imagine some kind of a soup. They're swimming freely all direction. Mm-hmm. When it cools down again, they are arranged once again, but now according to the magnetic pull in the second event of cooling down. So this was the scientific part. What we did in our house is we took pieces of the floor of the house that we found in that structure, pieces of the floor of the second floor of the house. As I said before, it was a very big structure. It was a public structure, very, very, probably the house of the elite of Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. So the second floor of the house was the place where people actually live, and they have a very, very high quality flooring there. We found the pieces of the floor crashed down in the debris.
What was it made of? It was stone?
It was made of clay.
Okay.
Of clay, and into the clay they integrated pieces of calcite, of crystals of calcite, and they polished it from above so nicely that basically what you had is some kind of like marble-like material, reddish, very shiny, very unique. Actually, that's the first time we found something so high quality from this period, from the late Iron Age. In Israel, as far as I know, everywhere else, we're still studying it to understand how exactly they did it, but that's a piece of technology that is very rare and very unique. So first, what we ask ourselves is first, can we actually say that the house was burned down? What was the temperature? Can we understand how it burned down? Did the whole structure burn down? Maybe only pieces of it? Did it burn down and collapse at the same event? Or maybe just stood there empty for many years as you can see, after earthquake, for example, buildings are partly standing and then collapse with time. We want to understand what happened. How do you burn the city? How do you destroy the city? So what we did is we sampled the magnetic orientation of the chemicals inside many floor fragments that we found all around the house. And try to imagine the house was destructed. So the flooring was lying in different orientation, different pieces all over the place. Some are back down, some vertical, depends how they fell down during the destruction. And what we realized that first the material burned down to about 500 to 600 degrees, meaning it was a really big fire. And second, that when we sampled the paleomagnetism, all the minerals in the different pieces of the flooring were pointing to the same direction, meaning that they got heated up and cooled down as we found them in the different orientation. Exactly. So now we understand that not only the house was burned down, but it burned down and collapsed in the same event, and that the whole structure, the whole more than 17 meters long structure, was burned down at the same event and collapsed, meaning someone wanted this house to be destructed. It's not a common, I don't know, fire that caught one of the rooms and destroyed that part. The whole house was burned down and destroyed.
So let me ask you something, because so much of the city, even today, is built of stone, mainly of limestone.
Right.
Does limestone burn? Does stone melt or burn in any way?
No, the stone is not burnt. We're talking about organic material.
Okay.
We assume there are two sources of organic material in these houses. First, the beams that held the floor of the second house. Basically, when you don't have concrete and you don't know how to build arches, the only way to build stores is to put big beams in between the walls. On this beam, you put branches and small wood and stuff like that. On this, you put earth, and then you got the floor. So you need a lot of organic material to carry the roof or the floor of the second house, the second floor. Second sources of organic material might be material that is stored in the house. Jars filled with olive oil, for example, food for the animals, furniture, all kind of other stuff, material that you got in this house.
Leather, clothes, things like that?
Yeah, something like that. But still, if you just, I don't know, throw a match into this house, most probably wouldn't caught fire, especially not fire big enough to destroy the whole structure.
Right.
If you want to do something like that, someone needs to spend time and effort and energy to go in between the different rooms, to burn the ceiling, to make sure that the house is destructed. This is not something, or let's say it's less possible that it happened by mistake. It's more possible that it happened deliberately. Someone wanted this house to be burnt down. What is interesting is that the biblical text tells us about the destruction of Jerusalem. First, it says that the Babylonians destroyed all the houses of Jerusalem, but then the phrase goes and it said, every big house they burnt in fire. And the interpretation of it, so it took some time, but then we realized, not us, people already understood before, that although in our imagination the Babylonians destroyed the whole city, left nothing but debris, it makes no sense to do something like that. When you conquer a city or a new place, you don't want to destroy it completely. You want people to continue to live there. You want to get taxes out of the people who live there. You want to steal all the treasure from the houses and from the temple mount. You don't want to destroy everything. You want the place to keep functioning after you conquered it. So it's very, very rare that armies actually raise a city down to earth. They almost always leave a place to continue. And we think that this is what we see here in Jerusalem. The Babylonians are destroying the big houses, the symbol of the previous government. The houses of the minister, the temple, of course, the palace probably. So they're destroying the big symbols, the propaganda of the authority.
Right.
But they leave the city, the common houses most probably would not destroy. And this is what Nitzan, for example, this is what her PhD is about. She is now trying to understand the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem, comparing what we found at Givati with other places where layers from this period of time were exposed.
So why does this layer have global implications that we've been reading about?
Okay, so beside that, what now the understanding for archaeology, as I explained, geologists that trying to map the changes in the magnetic pool of Earth are trying to find pegs, chronological pegs, to which they can compare other places. Now, in geology and even in archaeology, usually the dating that you got is by 100 of years, 50 years. It's very hard to find exact dating.
Right.
And what we found here is the exact date of 586 BCE, meaning we gave scientists from all other places in the world, from geologists to chemistry, for people who are studying how birds know where to fly. Now they got the exact peg in the exact day that they can compare everything else to it. It's very, very rare, and this is why people from all over the world are so excited about these finds.
That in August of -586, this was the world's magnetic field, and they can use that for their own scientific research wherever they are on the planet.
Right. And for archaeologists, especially here in Israel, if one now excavated a new site somewhere, and you find there also a destruction, or maybe even find an oven that was heated up, and he can measure the magnetic orientation of this oven and compare it to what we got. And even if that side they don't have exact dating, comparing the magnetic pool to what we got now in Givati gives you a new dating method that was not existed so far.
Wow, incredible. Now, so you talk about how this was really deliberately set on fire. And that's what I was trying to get my listeners really to picture, is that when you have these big stone buildings and the stone might be scorched, but it's not, doesn't burn, then it's going from room to room, as you said, and really deliberately taking this building down. But there are other buildings that we have from that time period, meaning we know they were standing in the First Temple period, yet they were still standing into the Persian period and maybe even beyond. For example, another dig that was a few weeks ago, they were talking about a Ramat Rachel, which was also some kind of fortress palace with beautiful gardens, beautiful water gardens, that a lot of investigation. And they're some kind of administrative center. So why do you think, and obviously this is just conjecture, that the Babylonians would have destroyed some places and others they left for continual use, as we see, because there isn't a layer of destruction there?
Right. Okay, first, Ramat Rachel is a unique and marvelous site. And as we understand it today, this was, as you said before, an administrative center of the Judean kings at the eve of Judea. We're talking about the last decades before the destruction. Now, but as we said before, you don't destroy the place down to the ground. Even during the Babylonian period, most probably people still live in Jerusalem, still live in Judea. There had to be someone to control all of that, even if we are now talking not of huge and rich cities, but on villages and relatively poor people. These people still need to pay taxes to the empire. So
always.
Always, exactly.
Always, yeah.
Yeah, that was part of life from the beginning.
Death and taxes, nothing changes.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
So
that was Ramat Rachel.
So that was probably what happened in Ramat Rachel. Definitely later on during the Persian period. We know that the structure that was built, as I said before, at late 8th, 7th century BC was still in function during the Babylonian period, or at least most probably was still standing. And then during the Persian period, they reused the place and actually made it much bigger and much more fancier. There's a garden there and water pools and all that stuff. It became a real palace during the Persian period.
Yeah.
So Ramat Rachel stayed, well, first maybe also as a symbol, but most important as an actual administrative center to control whatever is going in Judea.
And I mean, I know from some of the what Daphne Langhood has done in terms of checking for pollen inside the plaster on the walls of the water garden there, and so she knows even what was growing, which was fig and almond, and even etrog were coming up into Sukkot. So that was a very exciting find because they really weren't sure when etrog, it's the citron that we use as one of the 4 species on Sukkot, that we know that it was growing there during that period.
That's right.
So
exactly.
just in terms of showing how archaeology is so multidimensional now. It's not just, as you said, digging with a little pan and coming up with different shards of clay. We found bones also in the dig. So what would they, were they from what they were eating? Were they maybe from sacrifices? That who knows what was going on? Pets that they had?
Most likely, most of the bones that we found, especially in domestic structure, are part of the diet.
Right.
But that's something else that we need to study. Did they butcher the animal at the house? Did they went into the butcher and just bought part of it and brought it back to house? Did they cook it there? Did they cook some? All that stuff is something that now we are studying. And today, every small find that we found in field is going later on to experts that study it and trying to understand what it gives us in a matter of not only dating, but how people live. For example, talking about bones. So if you live in a relatively rich settlement, you may eat more cattle, more likely that within the cattle, you're usually going to butcher the young males, leaving the females for whatever milk and to breed more. If situations becoming worse and worse, you start basically butchering whatever you got.
Right.
So studying the bones, understanding the age of the animal and its gender, is it female or male, gives us lots of information about economy, about how well life were in that period and about changes. All these finds give us lots and lots of information. Pollen, as you mentioned, which is a relatively new method used in the last period to understand what was growing in places, when it was happening. Because if you find pollen of etrog, for example, in the plaster, it gives us information when the plaster was put in on the walls, because you need to have
during the time when the is blooming.
Exactly. So there's lots of information that we are now using, not on field, but at the labs at the different universities and in the Israel Antiquities Authority.
I remember reading years ago that, all joking about Jewish mothers and chicken soup aside, that there is a theory that it was actually the Jews who started eating chickens during the Second Temple period, that up until then they had been used by the Romans mainly for fighting each other, more for sport than actually for food. So, so finding these bones, of course, and in Jerusalem, have you found many bones of non-kosher animals? Because that might also give an idea of who was there. If you're not finding pig, it's more of a window, maybe.
That's a relatively big problem, especially the periods that we are talking about, because the laws of kashrut, as you know, are relatively later. So the question, does the law of kashrut, as we know them from the late periods, are they really reflecting what was in earlier period? That's a big question for one. And second, that we know that pigs were not part of the diet of most population during early periods. Even in the Philistine cities, in most of the cities, most settlements, they didn't eat pigs, or they did it in very low percentage. So the fact that you don't find pigs animal is not an evidence for who are the people who live there. Definitely, again, not in our period. So this is something that is, for now, a material or medium that we cannot use to identify who was living there. But let's say it's most likely that people who were living in Jerusalem at the late Iron Age, just before the destruction, and in the Persian period, it's probable to say that they were Judeans, or what we will call later on Jewish. there are some of the finds that we found in the Persian period layers in the structure have some Phoenician influence on them. For example, we found a vessel depicting the deity of Bes, the Egyptian deity Bes, that was very, very common in the Phoenician culture during that period. If that means that the people who lived there were Phoenician, most probably not. But at least it gives us some indication that there were connection between the people who lived in Jerusalem and the coast, and the Phoenician who lived on the coast. By the way, we also found in this Persian period layers large amount of fish bones. So again, an indication for at least exchange networks between Jerusalem and the coast. And also that the people who lived in Jerusalem, although living in a destructed town, still had enough money to buy fish traded from the coast. So it gives us another understanding of the economic situation at the city.
So if you're already mentioning Phoenicia, one of the finds that big announcement last week was from another area just south of Givati. It's called Armona Natsiv, the ridge that overlooks the old city from the south, and that they found what's called Proto-Ionic capitals, which is, for very many people, perhaps a connection to, it's a Phoenician design perhaps, that worked its way into Jerusalem in the First Temple period and was very ubiquitous, especially in the large, beautiful buildings. Really, when you find that, it's very much a symbol of First Temple Jerusalem. So I know that's not your day because you can't be everywhere. It was Yaakov Billig. But what can you tell us about that? And in terms of, so we've been talking about the Babylonian destruction in minus 586, but Jerusalem had a very tough time at minus 701 with Sancheriv and the Assyrians, who came in, destroyed Lachish, destroyed most of the cities of Judea, and but depending on how you want to read it, something miraculous, something happened, and Jerusalem wasn't destroyed, although it had to pay a lot of tribute. And what this is coming up with is perhaps the revival of Jerusalem, the 115 years that we have between those big battles with the Assyrians and the final destruction of Babylon. Something is going on in Jerusalem that there seems to have been some kind of pickup. They didn't just limp through the last 120 years or so. They actually were fairly strong. So what are your thoughts on that, and how does that fit in at all to what's happening in Givati, or we're just kind of really filling out a lot of the picture of that fascinating time period, end of Iron Age, end of the First Temple period?
Right. First, as you mentioned, we know that 7th century was a time of peak, as you said. Economy rose, Jerusalem becoming big again, Judea becoming big again, and you see construction everywhere. We mentioned Ramat Rachel, which was most probably built during this period. Now, again, the text described the attempt to conquer Jerusalem by the Assyrian, the fail, or maybe the miracle that saved Jerusalem, or most likely, if you read the biblical text and the Assyrian text, that Hezekiah was paying to the Assyrian king to basically leave Jerusalem alone.
Right.
So Jerusalem was not conquered, but all the other Judean cities were conquered and destroyed, and we know that Judea became a vassal, or remains a vassal state under the Assyrian. What we see is that, again, during that period, administration and economy are flourishing, and Jerusalem especially, but also around it, situation is getting much, much better than it was before. By the way, before we get into Armona Natsiv, the recent excavation at Bet Shemesh proved that also at other places of Judea, that when we thought that population left the destructed houses and moved somewhere else, we now understand that that was not the picture, because at Bet Shemesh, when excavating off the Tel, they found a completely new town dated to the 7th century, which was a marvelous excavation and great finds. So we now know that even in other places of Judea, people were moving from the ruined houses, but they just moved to the other side of the road and build a new town. Is what happened in Bet Shemesh, for example. The excavation at Armona Natziv, and by the way, also at Arnona, next by, also an excavation that was published about, I don't know, 2 months ago, something like that. We now realize that the periphery of Jerusalem was also flourishing. So you got Ramat Rachel in one place, this new administrative center at Armona Natziv, and next to it, most probably another one at Arnona. So it means that there are estates or administrative center to collect taxes, to collect goods from Judea and to bring them toward Jerusalem. And these estates or fortresses or palaces, and call them however you want, are located around Jerusalem in the periphery. So you can see that under the Assyrian, but when what we call the Assyrian peace during that time, when the people here in Israel was still living under Assyrian government, but they were focusing on life here in Israel and not trying to revolt.
Right.
Life became much, much better here in Judea. You got these palaces of the Judean kings everywhere. You got the economy rising. You got administration, rising. You got all the Lamelech seals and all this administrative
special stamps on handles from the king. Right. Of the king.
So all this happening here. Talking about the pillars and the capitals that were found there. These, of course, are the later types of these pillars. It's not related anymore, or if they were ever related to the Phoenician. So this is now not the case. These are the art, the symbols that were common in Judea at the the 7th century, the late Iron Age. This was the symbol of royalty, the symbol of administration. My colleague, Professor Yuval Gadot, believed that actually the use of these capitals everywhere is a symbol of the influence of the Assyrian government on what's going on here in Jerusalem. Will that be the case or not? It doesn't really matter, but we still understand that when people, the elite here in Jerusalem are building their estates, their palaces, this is what they are using to symbolize this is administration. When you walk into one of these buildings, you already know by the capital, by these symbols, that you are at the location of royalty.
Right. Wow. It's like a royal stamp to some degree. Right. So it seems that there's been kind of a flurry of either discoveries or announcements or publications in the last few months, more than usual. I don't know. Maybe it seems that to me, especially in a summer where because of travel restrictions, we've been told that a lot of the archaeological digs didn't even happen, because many of the archaeologists who come from outside of the country and either work as colleagues with one of the Israeli universities or do it on their own, weren't able to get here, weren't able to bring their students here. So it seems that in a year where many of the sites were shut down, has there been more focus because of that with Israeli archaeologists on Jerusalem?
Well, there are actually, the answer will be divided to two. First, most of the publications that you see are from excavation conducted by the Israel Antiquities Authority. And most of these excavations were not halted during the Corona period. Actually, because it's related to construction, it became even more important to continue this excavation while the other people were staying at home. Most archaeologists went to the excavation in order to complete their excavation during the time that it's easier to excavate. So now you see the result of this time when most people were sitting at home, but we archaeologists went back to field to continue and to complete excavation in a period that you don't have traffic and you don't have many problems, you can do it faster. So now you see the result of this. Second, and even more important, the policy of the Israel Antiquities Authority is to publish finds as fast as possible in order to explain people what we're doing and what we are finding. The manager of the Israel Antiquities Authority believes that finds are not belonging to archaeologists, they belong to the public. And therefore, the moment we find something, it is our duty to publish it and to tell people what we found, and not to hold these finds in the labs for, I don't know, 5-10 years until research is done.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea now is to find something, finish the excavation in order to make sure that no one can destroy anything, but then come and publish it to the public. And what you see now is basically the conferences that happening every time an excavation is over, and we got enough finds, which seems to be important enough to deliver it to the public.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned construction. Israel could be one big museum, archaeological museum, but we can't be. We have close to 9 million people living here who need homes, who need roads. You mentioned Beit Shemesh before. Some of that was discovered because of a very necessary road that needed to be widened in that area. And in the salvage excavations, they came up with this, and then becomes the big debate. What do we save? What do we cover up? Because again, we have a modern society living here, and you have to take people and movement and homes into account. And it's a very, very big issue here. But Givati, the reason I keep calling it a parking lot, because it was once known as the Givati parking lot. Now the asphalt is off and all the treasures are underneath. That area has shown some fabulous finds over the years, including rare Hasmonean buildings, perhaps, remains of the battles of the Hasmoneans, which is very rare in Jerusalem. So much of that was destroyed from the Roman period. Now we're digging, this area is actually under what was a Roman era palazzo, right? Like a big mansion. Are we under the courtyard now?
Yeah, Givati actually gives us, the excavation of Givati gives us a section throughout many layers of ancient Jerusalem.
It's like a cake.
Sorry?
It's like a layer cake of all these different time periods.
So basically, you need to imagine Jerusalem, especially the site of Givati, as a background detail. It's not a hill rising from the surface upward, but a valley that was filled up during the years. So the lowermost layers that we expose are dated to the 9th, 8th century BCE. And then we got a sequence of layers and settlements up to the 10th century AD, up to the Abbasid period. So we got sections throughout all these periods in Jerusalem. One of them, the Roman period, what was exposed there, not by us, by the previous excavator, the one Benami and Yana Chekhanovich. They exposed a huge structure, a huge villa that basically filled the whole area. That was built there. It is built with rooms around the central courtyard, surrounded by columns. Most probably it was a garden, maybe a fountain in the middle of this yard. And this huge structure is situated along the road, the street that climbing from Silwan, from the Shiloach pool toward the Temple Mount, toward Jerusalem. So along one of the biggest streets of Jerusalem. And it was built, when the Roman came and built that structure, they most probably didn't care that there are area remains below them. They just wanted to fill the area, level it, and build their own structure. And this is how archaeology goes. You need to remove some of the latest finds in order to go down and dig underneath to find earliest remains. So by definition, archaeology is something destructive. In order to go down in time and in space, we need to peel up some of the layers. So from the beginning in archaeology, you can't leave everything that you find. You have to remove some of it in order to find other things.
To dig is to destroy to some degree.
In a way, yeah. So what we are doing is that we are moving the structure that we are finding from the physical 3D dimension into, these days, digital 3D dimension, because we're doing scanning and everything. and most likely to two-dimension, writing, picturing, making plans. So you can't always come and see a structure on the field because it's gone, but it still existed in the books and in the reports, so we know all the data about it is still existed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this brings me to your question about the Shemesh and the debate about what you're doing. It's a huge debate. There's not clean cut, kindergarten answer that you can say, this is what you're doing, and this is how we do it. Every case needs to be learned. Every time you find something, you need to consult all the experts and to decide, is this unique? Is this important enough for us to preserve? Or we can say, okay, this is another structure from the Iron Age, Hashmonean, Roman period. We know about this kind of structure. Let's document it as the best we can. We'll excavate it the best we can. We'll remove all finds, take them to the lab, but there's no real reason to keep it here because it's very unlikely that lots of people will want to come and visit here, and it costs so much money to preserve it and to keep it safe in place. So in most cases, these remains will be removed to enable construction. In Givati, by the way, the structure that is about to be constructed there is going to be constructed on columns. So the lower floor will actually be archaeology. Visitors can come into, or hopefully will be able to come into the structure, go down to the lower floor, and then move above archaeology, look down at it, and maybe even go down and visiting the archaeology themselves. For example, coming into this house from the destruction of Jerusalem, and actually go inside and see the destruction the same way that you saw it during the excavation. This is a house, for example, that we decided not to remove, although we know that there might be some remains underneath. We're not removing it. We're not even completely excavating it. We're leaving some of the debris and some of the destruction in place, first for future people to come and see, and also for future archaeologists that may have new tools, new method, new way to do archaeology, to come and maybe re-excavate the same structure and to get new insight that we don't have the tools to get today.
It seems like the science is just with leaps and bounds getting you to be able to examine things that you never would have before. For example, what was just announced, we have the seeds, we have the dates, the ancient dates that they're now, it's a crazy thing. It's just amazing, crazy. Yeah. I'm like, just amazing. With Mr. Methuselah, who's now got some babies in May, December, and it's wild, and they're actually eating the dates from this extinct palm tree.
2,000 years old.
So we know what the old Judean dates were. So really the science, and you don't know what it'll be in 10 or 20 years, maybe there'll be some kind of X-ray machine that can, look 30 meters into the ground and say, oh, there's a structure there, or we can see what's happening.
No, it's an incredible word. I practice archaeology for about 20 years now. The method that we are now using on field on a regular basis are things that I was not even taught as a bachelor student because they were not existed back then.
Incredible.
So yeah, we're trying to follow science as it goes and to use as many methods as we can in order to reconstruct ancient life.
And it has to be difficult because you know that certain things are literally slipping through your fingers. Even though you're doing the sifting and you're looking through everything. A few months ago, there was a report that now with some new kind of lighting, they could see writing on clay shards that they never used to see before. So now they realize that they possibly threw away many things because it looked blank, that had they had the proper lighting, would show that the ink was coming up. So these storage bins, I would imagine, at the Israel Antiquities Authority are only going to get bigger because you essentially can't really throw anything out anymore.
Right.
Oh my.
Well, eventually, hopefully, in the future, all we need to do is to come to the field, scan it from above with this penetrating radar machine.
Yeah.
Or take a shirt and show it to the camera, and it will tell us if there's writing on, and which vessel it belonged to and which period. But that's future. For now, we still need to go down to the field every
And
morning,
get dirty.
get dirty, sweat, walk in the sun and rain.
But there's something about that, though. There
There's
really
something
is.
about it, yeah.
You know, I mean, I came home and I thought my washing machine is full of dust from the first temple period. Like even on a little level,
Very good.
it was wild. So let's just end. I know you have a busy day ahead. More maybe on a personal level. Archaeologists are human beings like everybody else, and many come in with a preconceived notion of where what they think they're going to find, like any kind of scientists, right? You have a hypothesis about what you're going to find. And there's been a lot that's spoken about different schools of archaeology and people saying the Bible is right and people saying, no, the Bible is completely wrong, and everything in between. On a personal level, as an archaeologist, have you found that you've changed over the years, that you've had hypotheses that got thrown out of the window? Like how as an individual and as a scientist, because it really is a science, yet you're living here and you're a scientist, but on the other hand, you're in a building where you could say your forefathers were. Like, this is not just any destruction. This is something that we've known about, through our culture, through our religion for a long time. So how does that work for you as a scientist, but also as an Israeli?
Well, it's intriguing and it's fascinating to go every day to work because you don't really know what you're going to find. And the real fun part about it is that you need to be flexible in your mind because hypotheses are always changes. And thing that, again, I learned as a student, there are new evidence today that teach us differently, or that it's not exactly as it used to be before. So although there are, you mentioned before, schools in archaeology,
Right.
what most of us are trying to understand is what happened in the past, what the evidence explained us about what happened. And you need to have an open mind and to, as many archaeologists love to say, let the stone speak. You want to see the evidence, and then you're trying to reconstruct according to this evidence the best way you can. Now, since we always have partial evidence, the reconstruction is based on us. But in archaeology, you will divide. These are the evidence. This is what we actually have. And this is what I think. As long as you base your reconstruction on the evidence, that's okay. People then come back to the find, to the evidence, and said, I believe you are wrong, and that's perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
If you'll find something new and prove me wrong, perfect, it's fine. I'll be sad maybe for a while, but that's perfectly fine. This is how it goes. We want to understand. I don't think there is a single archaeologist today that actually go to the field knowing or thinking that he knows what he's going to find. So we're going there and we're trying to understand what's there in the ground, and then go back to the text, to the Bible, to the Assyrian documentation, to the Babylonian description, to Josephus Flavius, and see if these finds fit or not fit the text, and what we think about this gap between text and find. But this is the fun part, always to look, always to find something else, always to find something new. I think it's the most fun jobs anyone can have, just waking up, going to the field, and know that something big is waiting there underneath for you to find.
Fantastic. And your enthusiasm is very, very catching. It's really, it's a wonderful profession. Thank you so much, Dr. Yiftach Shalev of the Israel Antiquities Authority, I think, for doing a terrific job of explaining to us what is going on in Jerusalem right now, and knowing that the next great find is perhaps going to be in 10 minutes next week, in a month, and putting together this beautiful, beautiful puzzle. And I know that when I take people to archaeological sites, I will say to them, this is what I know of till this minute. I'm telling you what they've discovered and the conclusions that they've made, but I can't tell you that in a week it won't change. And that's part of the real excitement of this very new old place that we live in. So thank you very much. Shana Tova, and looking forward to the continuing excavations. And
we're digging at the site. You're more than welcome to come and visit.
I will most definitely be back. Absolutely. Okay,
Great.
Thank you everyone. Eve Harow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. Thanks to Tabitha, and thanks to Ben, and thanks to all of you. And you can always, of course, write to me. Be well, everybody. I hope wherever you are well, and take care, and goodbye for now.